people business as well, right? Somebody just got acquired. There might be process change management that's required around trying to get everybody to agree to one new business process, right? As part of that,
How do you see these systems driving change for organizations?
what they've done is they've taken their kind of best practices and learning from implementing this over the years, and they've preloaded that instance you're getting with KPIs, dashboards, reports.
You go with the more generic offering that might save you a few dollars, and really that's where we've seen things go sideways. Hello, welcome to the Sayva Spotlight Tech Update, where we'll be exploring the world of business transformation from the eyes of an ERP implementer. My name is Johnny Kasian, and I'm the VP of Strategic Operations for Sayva Managed Services, and I'm joined by my colleague, Jared Sanderson, who's the Managing Director of Technology for Sayva Solutions. In a prior Sayva Spotlight, we were joined by Program Leader with a strong focus on organizational change management for the client side of ERP implementations. Today, we're joined by Eric Casazza, Managing Partner of Digital Services and seasoned ERP implementer at Citrin Cooperman. Eric, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Johnny. Appreciate you having me, and thanks, Jared, as well.
Great. So to start, can you share a bit about your journey and what led you to focus on ERP and digital transformation?
Sure. My degree coming out of college was in financial management, and this was in the early '90s, right about the time of the dot-com boom. And I really had two choices. I could sit for my CPA exam, or I could go into computer consulting. And I decided I didn't want to sit for the CPA exam, and the computer trend was starting to take off. So I went to work for Anderson Consulting out of school, fell into the role of an ERP implementer and financial services consultant, and spent the first 5 years of my career implementing SAP in large enterprise ERP, first as kind of a financial consultant, then a project manager of large SAP implementations. From there, I went to a healthcare staffing company for 11 years. I was the vice president of business systems. So I saw it from the inside and how you design and care and feed for kind of application infrastructure at scale. And that was a business that grew from 400 million to about 1.3 billion and went public, and did a variety of things there, from founding the PMO for large scale program management, M&A for 3 years. I was the senior controller as well, and then ran about $100 million sales division. Last 11 or 12 years, I became the CEO of a consulting company. And so grew that over the last 11 or 12 years and sold that to Citrin Cooperman in June of 2023. And now I'm the practice manager for Citrin Cooperman Advisors in our digital services practice. We've got three main umbrellas: an audit umbrella, a tax umbrella, and an advisory umbrella, which includes digital services and other complementary services as well.
Fantastic. Well, it's safe to say you've done a lot of different things. You've definitely seen, all angles of the business. All right. So today we're going to talk about the role of ERP in business transformation. So let's just talk about, the transformative role that ERPs play in modern businesses. Eric, as ERP capabilities have evolved significantly, covering everything from the general ledger and financial reporting to automation and predictive analytics, how do you see these systems driving change for organizations?
Yeah, it's a great question, Johnny. And I think one of the biggest things that's changed over time is ERP, which stands for Enterprise Resource Planning, used to be viewed as a system really for accountants. It was kind of really designed around the core financials of the business, which is kind of the spinal cord, if you will, and kind of the lifeblood of the business. And you had more enterprise applications like SAP and Oracle that were designed to go across the entire enterprise, including areas like HR and payroll and warehouse management and things like that as well. And what's happened over time, particularly with cloud-based SaaS systems in the mid-market, is they've really expanded their footprint to go across the business. And so you don't have to have these enterprise applications anymore to get that full suite view of your entire business in one place and one single source of truth. And so, when we tend to think of things, it's really around how you integrate the business process together. So if you take your order to cash, procure to pay, record to report, return to credit type of processes, those used to have to flow through 5, 7 different systems to get one integrated view of that business process. Now more of that is possible all in one suite of ERP. So you have all your team together across the enterprise, looking at one source of the truth, one integrated process flow in one system.
Absolutely. It seems like it's just evolved tremendously, especially over probably the last decade.
Yeah, it absolutely has. And, one of the things that's really taken place as well is these ERP platforms used to really deal with the core business processes. And there was a lot of elements that were built on the outside through third-party products, for example, like AP automation, right? And as the major software providers in the ERP landscape are looking to continue to build R&D and to add value for their licensing, they've started to incorporate a lot of those scope areas. So we've seen tremendous improvement in areas like e-banking, and electronic bill capture, for example, where those are now part of the core suite where you used to have a third-party product. Same thing with some of the advanced financial reporting and budgeting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So looking at the ERP landscape, platforms like QuickBooks serve small, medium-sized businesses, while enterprise-grade solutions such as Oracle or SAP S/4HANA support more complex operations. How do businesses determine where they fit on the spectrum, and what factors guide their selection?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a perfect rubric for it. I mean, we tend to classify, I think the market does in general, into three kind of major categories, which would be SMB for small business, mid-market, and then enterprise. Normally, what we see clients that start on QuickBooks, they're using that as they start up. If they're have inventory, they might add on a product like a fishbowl or something like that. But generally, and no perfect rule, but generally when they get to about 5 to 7 million of revenue, those things start to wobble, and there's either no integration between them. They've cobbled together different systems that aren't integrated. And actually, surprisingly, the cost starts to kind of add up of all those kind of single point solutions as well. And then we see the mid-market products like NetSuite or a Dynamics Business Central that would probably start closer to that 7 to 9 million range. It could go all the way up, and we've got clients on NetSuite that are well over $1 billion in revenue. And so it's not, in some sense, it's not so much about the client, because you can have a holding company that's $1 billion holding company that's doing very few financial transactions, or you can have a high volume retail that's got 400,000 SKUs. So it's taking a look at the volume that's going through, that landscape. But generally, the mid-market applications are pretty broad. I mean, they go from that 7 or 9 million, no perfect rule, but up to about 750 million in revenue. And then you're seeing 750 million kind of plus more in that enterprise space. So that's a rough revenue idea. But again, you really have to go through. We do a scoping call with a client, understand all their very specific needs, multi-currency, multi-entity, all those kind of things before we would recommend a solution that would fit their needs. But with SaaS products, we are seeing clients stay much longer on systems. It used to be the average was every 7 years, the client would turn over their ERP platform. We've got clients now that are 15, 20 years on the same platform because the SaaS products releasing 2 releases a year, they just continue to grow and scale with them.
Yeah, so the devil's really in the details, especially when it comes to transaction volume. Yeah, we definitely see that on the small business end. Some of our clients, they might be 20 or $30 million clients, but they have the volume of a much smaller client just because of their business model, right? And then, we have clients in e-com that are selling small, consumer products, and their transaction volume is enormous. And they might only be a, $5 million company, but, they're busting at the seams in QuickBooks. So
that's right. And all these software producers, price their software differently as well. Some price it by the functionality, some price it by the user count, some price it, in user count tiers from kind of a starter edition to a standard edition to a premium edition, which doesn't mean you're moving kind of instances, but it just means you're kind of upgrading your licensing as you're using more of the platform as well. And some actually licensed by volume too, like Acumatica is one, for example, that prices based on the volume of business that you do.
Interesting. All right. So, we see significant differences in ERP capabilities across industries. So, whether it's inventory management and manufacturing, compliance and healthcare, or customer insights in retail, how should organizations approach ERP implementations with these vertical specific needs in mind?
Yeah, ultimately, an organization needs to make sense that the software ecosystem they're implementing is a fit for their business, right? And what we tend to see, particularly in different industries, is a client may look at something that we would call a niche player, basically, or a small software company that's developed something specifically for this vertical niche. And I'll give you an example. We had a company that was a $500 million marketing and media company that came to us and said, "Hey, what about this? What about this software? This looks good. Should we implement this for our ERP?" And we looked at the organization. It was a 7-person company that had written the ERP software. So a $500 million company, you're not going to bet your business on a 7-person startup as well, right? And so you tend to see, particularly in industries, maybe where there's not a core ERP that fits it perfectly, like e-waste recycling is a classic example. I was talking to one of our partners yesterday about cannabis and the seed processing for cannabis, right? And you kind of end up with this choice between a small niche software company or a core ERP that might have an add-on that somebody's built basically to handle that specific requirement. And generally, our recommendation is to go with that core ERP in the add-on, because that core ERP, if it's a platform like Microsoft or NetSuite, there's so much research and development they've got thousands of developers that are constantly innovating on that product set, where you're going to get all the benefit of that going forward. You'll have the best of both worlds of all the core functionality as well as the specific vertical add-on that you need. And generally, those people that create those add-ons, we call them ISVs or independent software vendors, they build to the largest platform because that's the most potential customer-based add-on too. And I can't tell you how many times we've had a customer, I've seen it, where somebody's gone with a small company because it looked good to them. And then when they get into it, they realize they didn't really do their due diligence on all the functions and features. So there's scope that's missing. And this company is small, they can't even service them with their own consultants. And and those features aren't coming for a while. And there's just a lot of other benefits of utilizing a large platform. It's easier to train your people. You might be hiring, people that already have that experience because they use that tool at another company as well. So there's a lot of those different considerations. Some of the software producers, like NetSuite in particular, have actually verticalized their offerings. So NetSuite, for example, has Suite Success. When you buy the product, you're buying Suite Success for manufacturing and distribution, Suite Success financials first. And that means what they've done is they've taken their kind of best practices and learning from implementing this over the years, and they've preloaded that instance you're getting with KPIs, dashboards, reports, security roles, things like that are specific to your industry. Now, you may not use all of it. You might use 70% of it, but it's going to save time and cost and implementation because that's already been built out specifically for that vertical.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you'll grow into probably some of those other features over time, I'd have to imagine.
Yep, that's right. And it's designed around best practices. So you may learn something along the way, or other, KPIs or dashboards that, that you may utilize that you didn't even think of.
Eric, I was curious, have you seen, the stickiness, 7 to 10 years of life plus, using these SaaS products? There's a long, everyone in the company has to, follow through with whatever was set up, right? And for the good and the bad. Do you see a lot of the decisions made oftentimes because someone has used, let's say, NetSuite before, and they say, "Hey, I'm going to a new company because I'm familiar with NetSuite. I'm just going to go with it, whether it makes business sense for my company." And then that company now has maybe a broader system, or maybe invested heavilier in something they can't support, or vice versa, maybe going to QuickBooks and they should have been in a more robust software earlier on. You see this as a common theme in?
There's certainly a preponderance, and when we're dealing with kind of buyers making a decision, whether that's a CFO, or a controller or a CEO on the financial side, there's certainly a preponderance of, I've used this before and I'm comfortable with it, right? And there's also the preponderance of, hey, I heard somebody over here implemented this and it went terribly, right? And generally it's not the software's issue, in terms of the software works for these SaaS platforms by and large, but there can be a huge difference in who you pick or partner with to implement that, and whether that's their team that had issues and challenges or the consulting partner, right? It can be a bad experience. So some of those things, when they hear, "Oh, I heard somebody implemented, NetSuite and it was terrible," or Sage and it was good, or whatever, you have to take that with a grain of salt, because every project and environment is different, both the client's capabilities and the consulting partner's capabilities as well. I really wouldn't put much of it at the software's fault unless it was really a mismatch between the fit and the gap of the software and doing their due diligence up front on whether it was a fit for that scope. But certainly over time, businesses change, and somebody may implement something like a chart of accounts within a solution and figure out that it needs to be done later. And so, in addition to our core consulting team, we have an optimization team that works with clients. And that's a separate team that helps them optimize their solution over time. I mean, these software producers are putting major dollars, and part of the benefit of paying for this licensing is to get these new features. You're not paying anything extra for it. And so when those 2 releases come out a year, you want to evaluate that and say, hey, is this something that we were doing manually before? Can we take advantage of it? Right. And so it's not, we do kind of 3-year and 5-year TCOs, total cost of ownership for our clients, because it's not like you should implement this solution and then let it sit for the next 7 years, right? The business is constantly evolving. The technology is evolving. There's a cost of continuing to optimize it, but there's a benefit, for doing that.
On the small and medium-sized business, end of things, when we see implementations go sideways, it's usually because the customer went cheap on the implementation partner. They tried to, go a more generic route rather than a highly specific one. So, if you're a consumer products company, instead of going with, a VAR that has a high proficiency in consumer products, you go with the more generic offering that might save you a few dollars. And really that's where we've seen things go sideways because folks are implementing it more from a software standpoint and not from a use case standpoint. And then what usually happens is they end up paying more in the long run, because then you have to go get that specialized partner to, put the toothpaste back in the tube and fix things. Have you run into that before?
Yeah, certainly, Johnny. We've seen that. We've done what we would call rescued implementations, where clients have gotten halfway through their budget, but 10% of the way through the actual project. And as you said, there's differences in methodology. I mean, we've done 7,000 plus projects. We've been doing this for 30 years, and there's a lot of lessons learned and best in class methodology. We have a separate PMO that drives the project management cadence, et cetera. I think what you see is sometimes people offer these very low fixed price bids for an implementation. Sometimes those are completely done by offshore resources, and nothing wrong with that, but sometimes it can create a gap in language. It can create a gap in time zone. And the philosophy around that is, we're going to talk to you about your general ledger for an hour, and 2 days later, we're going to come back and you should have implemented your own general ledger, right? So it's what I would call a coach and mentor model versus a side-by-side, where we've got experts that are coming in that are experts in manufacturing process, that have masters from MIT in manufacturing, right? So when we sit down and talk about demand planning, when we talk about how to accelerate inventory turns, how we talk about, how to set up and automate your warehouse, we're doing it with people that understand not only the technology, but understand the business process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes a ton of sense. All right, let's pivot over to M&A. Eric, I know you have a lot of experience in mergers and acquisitions. So let's combine the ERP integration with M&A. So M&A often adds complexity to ERP systems, especially when an enterprise company is acquiring a middle market company, and you end up having to do some sort of roll up. What's your approach to handling these integrations?
Well, I think, we're generally hired by the acquirer, right, to come in and help them do the roll up of the acquiring target. And we start with, companies even earlier from a Citrin Cooperman perspective, whether that's transaction advisory, we do IT due diligence in my group as well, so they know what they're getting into even before they sign the deal. But post deal, as they're going into the acquisition integration, in most cases, the acquiring entity wants to roll the target entity onto their financial platform. That's not all the case. Sometimes they know they've got a terrible ERP, and the acquiring entity may have a 2 or 3 year contract out there for a SaaS platform that's better. So we've done it both ways. We'll help them evaluate that both ways. But in a very large enterprise, sometimes you'll see that they say, hey, you know what? It makes sense for us just to use a hub and spoke model. We've got SAP, but we're growing so fast and acquiring so quickly. We want to use NetSuite for our spoke, and we want an integration model between the two to consolidate financials, right? And you can use a platform like Vena for advanced financial planning and budgeting that would be able to do that, right? Other ones where it's, what I would call probably the 70% rule, is they want to do the acquisition onto their platform. They tend to want to do it pretty quickly. And so there's a way you can spin up a new entity, a consolidated entity, and use that just to consolidate financials and map the chart of accounts while you're doing the rest of the project. But generally within 2 or 3 months, you should be able to bring on that additional entity. It's a data conversion exercise, it's a process mapping exercise. Depends a little bit if the acquiring target is similar from a business process point of view. We've done a lot of M&A and we realize this is a people business as well, right? Somebody just got acquired. There might be process change management that's required around trying to get everybody to agree to one new business process, right, as part of that. And so all those are factors at play, but generally we're mapping chart of accounts, we're mapping processes, we're converting data, we're training, the team and bringing them over to the acquired platform within a matter of months.
So you mentioned the hub and spoke model. So, what roles do tools like middleware platforms, AI predictive analytics or hybrid ERPs play in navigating the complexity of these M&A integrations?
Yeah, well, I think we always start with, kind of the question of the end goal in mind, right? And so if the intent is to be a hub and spoke from a pure financial point of view, then you can use an advanced financial tool like a Avena to do that consolidated financials, and then you build the integration points between the ERP platforms. If you're trying to manage other things like manage inventory and do kind of intercompany relationships and things like that, then it gets a little bit more complicated. And we would generally look to use an iPaaS platform, what's called Integration Platform as a Service, which is a data broker, kind of more click, not code, to connect the ERP platforms together. And a lot of the common ones out there, like Soligo, for example, or Boomi, are great products, and they have endpoints that are already built to these ERP systems. And so you're kind of connecting these two endpoints together. You're training the client on how to use this data broker service to move data back and forth. But that way you're using kind of one iPaaS platform for your entire enterprise.
Eric, you mentioned the people are a big part of it outside of the tools. And do you find when you're coming into companies, does the talent on the finance team or whether it's the IT organization, do they have the right talent to partner with you? And the reason I ask this question is a lot of our business comes through, and sometimes, again, we come with those rescue projects as well, but we're representing the company to make sure they have ask the right questions to the SI to get the right, implementation and to help support them, really, because, you need usually a PM on both sides because people are running their day to day. Otherwise, they have meeting fatigue driving a big implementation. So I was just curious from a people side, how often do you see the company actually having the right people, the right skill sets, or having to bring in additional resources? And what are those skill sets typically, or what are those resources lacking? Like, where are they lacking in
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Jared. And I mean, particularly in kind of the mid-market size organizations or small mid-market size organizations, right? I mean, people run thin, and people already have a day job, particularly people on the finance side that are going through month-end close every 4 weeks and things like audits and whatnot as well. So normally when, a project comes along like this, I mean, it's going to add a 30-40% load on top of their day job. That's going to kind of peak in the beginning of the project during requirements gathering. It's going to go down in the middle during the build, and it's going to go up at the end during user acceptance testing and cutover, right? Kind of think of it like a shallow V or U in terms of an effort through the time cycle of the project. Sometimes clients will come to us and say, we don't have an internal project manager. Can you be our internal project manager? And we say, well, no, that's kind of a conflict of interest. There's a check and balance there. We can't really manage ourselves. And that's where I think firms like yours play such a key role, both for helping them with project management throughout their implementation. But think about you're kind of building the foundation of the house and the architecture of the house of your business when you're doing this for years to come. And when you do that, you want your most knowledgeable people, your subject matter experts, or SMEs, as we call them, right? And executive champions part of this project. And those are the critical people running the business as well, right? So I think wherever possible, being able to, you think about that 30 or 40% load, where you can take your knowledge experts, assign them this to the project, and get fractional help and assistance, either part-time or full-time, through the course of these projects, which normally run 4 or 5 months from an overall implementation cycle average, to backfill anything that can be trained fairly easily, like AP processing. AR processing, things like that don't require a long material knowledge, right, in the business to do. And hopefully the organization's grown and those, can be leveraged anyway at some point. But we do definitely see a need to backfill resources to have an effective project so the project doesn't run into bottleneck or the rest of the business isn't robbing Peter to pay Paul, if you will, relative to the resources. But it's a great way for firms like yours to be able to help out.
I think it's really thoughtful, definitely, to have the team, the SMEs, really invested so that you're not left with, if you bring someone in, an expert, and then they do it all, and then the company's left with nothing. Yeah, you definitely want to train, make sure everyone's fully bought in, but owning it from start to finish. So taking that lean approach and making sure that knowledge transfer is there early on, and backfilling some of those kind of day-to-day tasks, or partnering together and sharing your knowledge early on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you get towards the later phase of the project, into the user acceptance testing in particular, there starts to be this deer in the headlights look, and hopefully that's not the case of, hey, in a month and a half, this is going to be your system that you're running on, right? And there comes that kind of transition from the consulting partner to the client to own the system, own the business process, et cetera. So to your point, and those people post go live, right, should really be the first coach, the first kind of champion for their team, the first line of support, because they've been part of the project throughout. They're going to have the most depth and insight to answer questions for their team after the go live as well.
For sure.
Yeah, there's just a greater element of buy-in and ownership, right? When the internal controller was part of that, that implementation, and you bring in the fractional talent to keep the month-end close and the day-to-day accounting going, rather than trying to make those decisions on the company's behalf during the implementation.
Right. And your team will thank you for doing that, or they'll hate you for not doing it. One of the
yeah, that's definitely our preferred method. All right, so let's pivot. I know we touched on it briefly, but let's pivot more to industry specific, insights. So, different industries have unique needs. Maybe you could give us, just some high level examples. Like, how would challenges differ for, a manufacturing company versus, let's say, a SaaS company? What are the different things that you need to consider, and just challenges that you'll probably run into?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you think about most ERP platforms, they have what I would call the tickets to play, right? Everyone has a general ledger, accounts payable, accounts receivable, fixed assets, right? Those core elements of accounting. When you get into the different types of businesses, it really needs to be where that strength is. For example, for somebody that's doing not only manufacturing, but like advanced manufacturing, that actually wants shop floor detail and timing between machines and load balancing between locations, right? Those start to get into more specific requirements that some of the ERP platforms have and some do not. Particularly, for example, for SaaS, reoccurring billing is a core need. And there's an overlap between the reoccurring billing that you're doing and the ability to do the advanced revenue recognition for that reoccurring billing. And there's different rules on that around how you can kind of bundle together services and licenses for recurring billing or not, and the revenue recognition rules that apply for that. So when you get into some of those deeper areas of industry, that's where the ERP platforms start to differentiate themselves and how deep they go and how many of those requirements they can take on. Some of them, like healthcare, for example, you may find a completely different data model. So in a lot of these ERP platforms in the mid-market have a kind of a mid-grade CRM suite, if you want to think of it that way, relative to the ERP platform that's all part of that. Well, instead of being called the customer in healthcare, that record may be called the patient, right? And so, or in financial services, it may be your family, right? That's the core record. So in major industry differences, you'll see the data model itself changing a little bit to represent that industry.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a ton of sense. All right, so looking forward to the future of ERP. Obviously, technology is evolving at a rapid pace. What trends or technologies do you think will shape the ERP landscape in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I mean, certainly the biggest one we're seeing by far is AI right now, right? And there's AI. Most mid-market size businesses are not the size and scale where they're getting to the point where they're hiring data scientists, prompt engineers. They're not walling off their own data lake from ChatGPT and feeding info, right? I mean, those are more enterprise type things that they're taking place. And so the AI that we're seeing in the mid-market is really two types. One, it's kind of in-platform AI. So it takes something like an ERP platform that's now starting to bake AI within the application, whether that be things like cash flow forecasting, advanced demand planning on the Salesforce side, Agent Force, for example, basically, and Einstein Analytics, are all these great tools. And they really are morphing from, what I would consider somebody wrote an algorithm and called it AI to true AI, right, and machine learning. The other part that we're seeing probably more broadly now is the generative AI implementations. And so, for example, we think the leading tool for that is Microsoft Copilot. So your team that's using Excel, Word, PowerPoint, right, Power BI, it's all baked into the tools they're already using. So the ability to get really good productivity gains on generative AI, clients can do that now. And I think you see a lot of CIOs out there knowing they need to start moving down the mandate basically for AI. The boards are asking about it, as well. And Copilot's a great way to do that. And it's honestly, a third technical implementation and 2/3 enablement and training and getting people just to think about how they do their work differently on AI. So the other trend I think you'll see outside of that is actually how people are implementing the software using AI. And so, from super quick examples of using Copilot just to summarize meeting notes and send them out, as opposed to a project manager taking half an hour to type that up, to things like being able to write your unit test scripts using AI, doing discovery using AI, right? And so there's all these things that we're starting to build into our methodology as well, thinking about how we implement, how can that be a better experience for our clients, and how we can do it more efficiently and lower cost using AI for our clients as well.
We're seeing a lot of companies definitely using the tool set, whether it's a Microsoft ecosystem, Sting, and that ecosystem to take advantage of all those tools and any, again, from whether it's Copilot or whatnot. It sounds like also within your space, there's a low-hanging fruit where companies might have signed up with a whole bunch of different companies. They have a whole bunch of different, licensing areas. They can consolidate some licensing under one area, save some money as well. But just, again, that consolidation of, if you're in the same ecosystem, you can use the data a lot more efficiently and effectively for any AI.
Yeah, and certainly, if you think about something like the Microsoft licensing stack, we say it all the time. We work with our clients on their Microsoft licensing, Azure licensing, and things as well. And what will happen is, an IT team will have bought a product to, whether it's maybe manage their mobile devices, like a mobile iron or something like that, right? That was out there, and then later they'll buy Office 365 licensing that has mobile device management, but nobody's gone back and compared the two to go, wait a minute, we have this now, we no longer need this, and they've just got duplication in their licensing stacks. So there can certainly be a lot of savings by doing, we do free analysis for our clients, taking a look at that and looking at their entire licensing stack and where they can save money.
Yeah, it's smart.
I think our IT manager just did that.
Yeah.
All right, Eric. Well, a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. So, what advice would you give executives planning an ERP transformation, or an M&A integration, with the ERP?
Yeah, I think one, it starts with finding the right partner. I think that makes a big difference, to find a partner that has experience with that technology and with your industry as well, and that can demonstrate that and show they've got qualifications and references that are very similar to you and your business, right? And they can help you evaluate what is the right fit from a software perspective. How do you think about that for your particular vertical industry? How mature is your team? And then how do you really plan that project for success, like we talked about, where they may need to bring in additional resources to help backfill the team? I'm a big believer, I'm a project manager by history, so I believe in kind of plan the work and work the plan, and so I certainly think it makes sense to spend the time up front to understand your requirements, to do kind of a fit gap analysis to potential solutions, and then understand what's going on in your business too. There's many businesses that have a major ERP initiative, but they've also got 5 other initiatives going on at the same time. So is your team going to be available to work through that, right, and to manage all those priorities? So I think ultimately it starts with finding a good partner that that has this expertise and can help them through that.
How do you go about doing that, Eric? So if I was an IT leader, or whether it's a CFO, and going Google or whatnot and say, okay, who's a good, maybe I'm thinking of a mid-market company. I'm thinking maybe NetSuite or Dynamics or something in that space. And how would I could get a list of companies. How would I find, how would you get found? And again, how would you help or kind of educate that CFO to go through that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, certainly, you can kind of Google search stuff and find the reviews. Most of whether it's Microsoft or NetSuite, things like that, will actually have a partner finder website where you can go on that partner finder website and say, this is kind of what I'm interested in. And it'll list, partners basically and their relative experience. I certainly do think references help in this regard. So when you reach out to other CFOs or CEOs or other people that have implemented that are similar in nature to you and relative to your business and your vertical, that may have solid experience kind of working with the group as well, that certainly helps. Yeah, there's no perfect crystal ball in finding that. I think from a Citrin Cooperman perspective, in addition to the technical expertise, we bring a lot of accounting expertise. We've got over 3,500 folks that are part of our team, so we bring kind of that blend. I think it helps to look at kind of the size of the partner you're working with and make sure that they're going to have enough resources and enough kind of scale, not only for the core implementation, but really to be your partner for 5 or 10 years to come. Because we work with NetSuite, we work with Salesforce, we work with Microsoft. All these things need to work together to have one integrated business process and an ability to really get to the analytics point of view, that you can look over all of this and make ahead of time kind of predictive decisions. So many times when people implement an ERP platform, they spend 90% of their time replacing what they have. And the reason they did it is what I call the last 5 yards. The reason what they did is they wanted the last 5 yards of the new stuff. And invariably what happens in implementation, sometimes the budget, sometimes the scope gets squeezed, and that last 5 yards becomes a phase 2. You really have to stay disciplined to say, what are the 3 or 4 KPIs that we really want to move the needle on? Are we designing the system for this? Are we testing the system for this? Are we coming back 3-6 months later and measuring the system that we got that right? So that's all part of our methodology to make sure that they're getting the benefit out of the implementation.
Great. No, thanks for sharing.
Thanks, Eric. We appreciate you sharing your expertise. Where can listeners learn more about your work?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it as well. Yeah, if they go to citrincooperman.com, and then if they click on the solutions link there, that'll drill down into our digital services offerings. And we've got all kinds of white papers on there, references and things like that as well on citrincooperman.com digital services.
All right. And follow Eric on LinkedIn as well. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And, look forward to chatting again.
Yeah. Thanks, Johnny. Thanks, Jared. Appreciate it as well.
Yep. Thanks, Eric.